I never thought a courtroom could feel so quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that presses against your chest, making it hard to breathe. I was sitting at the wooden table beside my attorney, fingers wrapped so tightly around a paper cup of water that it began to bend. The courtroom smelled faintly of old books and disinfectant, and somewhere behind me, a bench creaked as someone shifted their weight. Every sound felt too loud. Every breath felt like it echoed. The judge adjusted his glasses. My ex-husband's lawyer stood up, and then he said the sentence that would change everything. Your Honor, according to the prenuptial agreement, the child qualifies as a negotiable asset. For a second, I didn't understand the words. Negotiable, asset, child. They floated in the air, disconnected, unreal, like a foreign language I hadn't learned yet. Then my attorney whispered, so quietly, only I could hear it. This is worse than we thought. My heart dropped so fast, it felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. Because in that moment, I realized something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. My ex-husband wasn't fighting for custody. He wasn't fighting for visitation. He wasn't even fighting to hurt me. He was trying to sell our baby. The judge didn't react right away. He just stared at the lawyer, motionless, like he was waiting for a correction, a clarification, a joke. None came. Across the courtroom, my ex-husband sat perfectly still. His suit was tailored, expensive, the same kind he wore when we were married, the same kind that made him look powerful and untouchable. His face showed no emotion, not guilt, not fear, just confidence. That was when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a legal stretch. This was something he had planned. Months ago, maybe longer. My throat tightened. Every instinct in my body screamed to stand up, to shout that they were talking about a living, breathing baby, about my baby. But my attorney placed a hand gently on my arm. Let them talk, she whispered. They're walking into it. Walking into what? I didn't know yet. All I knew is that the man I once loved had found a way to turn motherhood into a transaction. As the lawyer continued speaking, words blurred together. Contractual language, future interests, binding agreements, legal terms designed to strip the humanity from what they were describing. My mind drifted. Not back years, not even months, just a few weeks earlier. The day I received the email. At the time, I thought it had been sent to me by mistake. The subject line was short and strange. Final bids, asset allocation. I almost deleted it. Almost. If I had, none of this would have come out, and my ex-husband might have gotten exactly what he wanted. Back in the courtroom, the judge finally spoke. Counsel, he said slowly, are you suggesting that a minor child can be transferred under the terms of a prenuptial agreement? The lawyer didn't hesitate. I'm suggesting, Your Honor, that the agreement allows for the negotiation of custodial interests under specific financial conditions. Negotiation. I swallowed hard. That word again. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. My attorney stood. Your Honor, she said, calm but firm. Before this goes any further, the court should be made aware of how the defendant interpreted that clause. She turned slightly toward me and nodded. That was my cue. My legs felt weak as I stood, the courtroom spinning for just a second before coming back into focus. Every eye turned toward me. Strangers, lawyers, the man who once promised to protect me. I took a breath and spoke. I didn't know my husband thought our child was an asset. I said, I didn't know until I saw the emails. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand for silence. Emails? He asked. Yes, Your Honor, my attorney said. And what those emails reveal Isn't that deeply disturbing? My ex-husband finally reacted. His jaw tightened, just for a second. But I saw it, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew something he didn't. The court was about to hear everything, and the man who thought he could auction control over our child was about to learn what happens when greed meets daylight. But to understand how it reached this point, you have to know who he was before the prenup, before the baby, before I realized love can be used as leverage, before the lawyers, before the contracts, before the word asset was ever spoken in a courtroom. There was a man who made me feel chosen. I met him on a night that felt accidental. A friend dragged me to a small charity fundraiser I didn't want to attend. One of those quiet events with too much wine and forced smiles. I remember standing near the back, pretending to read the program, when a voice beside me said, "You look like you're planning your escape." I laughed. That was him. Charming without trying. Confident without being loud. He had the kind of presence that made people turn toward him without realizing why. When he smiled at me, it felt personal, like he had already decided I mattered. We talked for hours. He told me about his work, his investments, the companies he'd helped build. He spoke about money the way some people talk about weather, something that just happened around him. I told him about my life, my job, the things I still wanted to become. He listened, or at least I thought he did. Our relationship moved fast, too fast, if I'm honest. Weekend trips turned into week-long stays. A toothbrush appeared at his place without either of us acknowledging it. He had opinions about everything, where we ate, what we watched, even how I should arrange my schedule. At first, it felt like care. He just likes being in control, my friends said, half joking. I didn't correct them, because when someone seems so sure of you, it's easy to mistake certainty for love. He proposed 6 months later. No ring at first, just a question, asked quietly while we sat on the balcony of his apartment overlooking the city. "I don't like wasting time," he said, "and I don't think you do either." I remember feeling flattered, chosen, like I'd passed some invisible test. The ring came later, expensive, impressive, exactly the kind people would notice, and they did. The prenup came shortly after, not during a fight, not during a tense conversation. He brought it up over dinner, casually, like he was discussing a restaurant reservation. "It's just standard," he said, slicing into his steak. "Anyone with assets does it." I hesitated. "I don't want money," I told him. "That's not why I'm here." He smiled. "I know," he said. "That's why I trust you." Those words mattered more to me than the document. So when he slid the folder across the table, thick and heavy, I didn't open it right away. "I already had my lawyers draft it," he added. "Saves time." Time. Everything with him was about time. Efficiency. Control. I did have it reviewed, briefly. The attorney I spoke with raised an eyebrow at certain clauses. Asked questions about future considerations and non-traditional assets. "He's being aggressive," she said carefully. "Not illegal, just thorough." Thorough sounded responsible, and I was in love. I signed it. Marriage changed the tone, not the rhythm. He still decided, he still led, but slowly my opinions started to feel optional. He managed our finances. He encouraged me to cut back at work, said it wasn't necessary anymore. "Focus on us," he said, "on the life we're building." And I did. I let myself become smaller so our life could feel bigger. When I found out I was pregnant, his reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't smile right away. He didn't hug me. He asked questions. "Was the doctor certain? Have you thought about timing? What does this mean legally?" Legally. that word again. Then he kissed my forehead and said the right things. But something had shifted, and I felt it. Looking back, the signs were there. The way he talked about legacy instead of family. The way he referred to the baby as an extension of responsibility. The way every conversation eventually circled back to planning, protection, ownership. I thought he was being careful. I didn't realize he was preparing. Because long before the divorce papers were filed, long before the courtroom, long before I ever saw that email, he had already decided what our child was worth. And the prenup I barely read was the key he planned to use. I used to think contracts were boring. Pages and pages of words designed to say the same thing in 100 different ways. Something you skim, sign, and forget. That's what I did with the prenup. And for a long time, it worked exactly as intended. The document lived in a fireproof safe in my ex-husband's office. Behind a framed photo of us on our wedding day, I never touched it, never asked to read it again. It felt like reopening something that had already been settled. Besides, he had told me not to worry. Everything's fair, he said. I made sure of it. I believed him. When the divorce began, the prenup came back into my life like a ghost. Suddenly, it wasn't just paperwork. It was a weapon. His lawyers moved fast. Too fast. They referenced specific clauses, page numbers, subsections. It was clear they had memorized every line. Mine hadn't, not yet. At first, everything seemed normal. Division of assets, financial disclosures, custody discussions framed in polite, careful language. Then my attorney called me one evening and asked a question that didn't make sense. Did your husband ever explain what he meant by future interests? I laughed nervously. No, I said. Why? There was a pause on the line. That phrase appears a lot, she said. More than it should. We sat together the next morning, side by side, reading the prenup slowly. Really reading it for the first time. Clause after clause outlined wealth, investments, properties, intellectual rights. It was complex but not unusual, until we reached the section labeled Assets of Anticipated Value. My attorney stopped reading. That's creative, she murmured. What does it mean? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she flipped back a few pages, then forward again, tracing references with her pen, cross-checking language, connecting dots that made my stomach tighten with every second of silence. Finally, she spoke. It's intentionally vague, she said, which is dangerous. The clause described potential assets acquired during the marriage that could not be easily valued at the time of signing. That included future business ventures, intellectual property, inherited interests, and then, buried in a sentence so long it felt endless, were 4 words that made my heart skip. Dependent contractual interests. What's that? I asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line. It's not a standard term, she said, which means whoever wrote this wanted flexibility. Flexibility for what? The prenup stated that in the event of divorce, dependent contractual interests could be negotiated under predefined financial parameters. Negotiated. There it was again. My attorney leaned back in her chair. If someone wanted to argue that a dependent, under certain interpretations, had a contractual value tied to custody, support, or control, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I felt sick. You're saying he could claim our child is an asset? I whispered. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said something worse. He could try. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying every conversation, every comment he had ever made about planning, legacy, leverage. Words that once sounded responsible now felt calculated. I remembered how he insisted the prenup be future-proof. How he said, "You never know what life brings." I remembered the way he smiled when I signed. 2 days later, my attorney called again. This time, her voice was different, tighter. "I found something," she said. "What?" I asked. She hesitated. "An email thread," she said. "Not sent to you, but referenced in discovery." My chest tightened. "What kind of email?" "The kind that suggests your husband wasn't just thinking about possibilities," she said carefully. "He was planning for them." When she forwarded it to me, I stared at the subject line for a long time before opening it. It felt like crossing a line you can't come back from. Final bids. Asset allocation. My hands trembled. This wasn't legal language. This wasn't hypothetical. This was a transaction. As I scrolled, names I didn't recognize appeared. Amounts, conditions, timelines. And one phrase, repeated again and again, made everything clear. Custodial control pending transfer. That was the moment I stopped wondering if he could do this and started asking myself how far he was willing to go. Because whatever this was, it wasn't about family. It was about ownership. Pregnancy is supposed to soften people. At least, that's what everyone told me. But with him, it did the opposite. After the first trimester, something shifted in the house. Not dramatically. Not in ways that were easy to point to. It was quieter than that. More precise. He started asking where I was going, who I was meeting, how long I'd be gone. Not angrily. Not accusingly. Methodically. "If something happened to you," he said once, "I should know your routine." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. My doctor appointments became scheduled events he needed to approve. He wanted copies of reports, timelines, projected costs. He asked questions the doctor wasn't used to hearing. Is this pregnancy high risk financially? What contingencies exist if complications arise? The doctor looked at me like she was waiting for me to say something. I didn't. At home, he reorganized everything. Nursery items were itemized and logged. Insurance policies updated. Security systems upgraded. Every decision had a paper trail. "It's not control," he said. "It's preparation." Then came the comments. Subtle at first. "Children complicate negotiations." "Custody is leverage whether people admit it or not." "Emotion clouds judgment. I prefer clarity." He never raised his voice. He never threatened me directly. He didn't need to. I stopped working at his suggestion. "You don't need the stress," he said. And honestly, it simplifies things. Things. That word followed me everywhere. When I hesitated, he reminded me gently, almost kindly, that the prenup protected him from financial exposure. "And you from responsibility," he added with a smile. I didn't like the way that sounded. The first real argument happened in the 3rd trimester. I mentioned wanting my sister in the delivery room. He didn't look up from his phone. "That won't be necessary," he said. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. "I prefer controlled environments," he said. "Too many people complicate outcomes." I told him it wasn't his decision. That was the first time I saw anger in his eyes. Cold. Focused. Not loud. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "Nothing about this situation is uncontrolled." The room felt smaller. He apologized later. Brought flowers. Said stress made him say things wrong. I accepted it. Because I wanted peace more than I wanted to be right. After the baby was born, everything accelerated. He installed cameras, not just in the nursery, in the hallways, the living room, anywhere movement could be tracked. "It's for safety," he said, but the footage went to his devices. not mine. He started traveling more, and when he was home, he made calls behind closed doors. Legal calls, financial calls, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Once, I overheard him say, "The asset will mature faster than expected." I froze. He laughed when I confronted him. "Bad choice of words," he said. "You're sensitive." That night, I recorded our conversation. I didn't plan to. I didn't know why. Something inside me just knew. The divorce didn't come as a shock. What shocked me was how prepared he was. He filed first. His terms were precise, aggressive, almost rehearsed. He wanted shared custody, but under conditions, schedules tied to financial benchmarks, access contingent on compliance. It read less like a parenting plan and more like a contract. When I told him I wouldn't agree, he didn't argue. He smiled. "I expected that," he said. "This is where the agreement helps both of us." That was the moment fear settled in my chest for good, because I realized something then. He wasn't reacting to the situation. He was executing it. And somewhere between the cameras, the clauses, and the quiet threats, I understood the truth I had been avoiding. He never saw me as an equal partner, and he never saw our child as a person, only as leverage. And soon, he was going to try to cash it in. Divorce isn't usually quiet. People yell, they cry, they break things. Ours started as a business meeting. He sat across from me in a glass-walled conference room, legal pads neatly aligned, his attorney to his right, calm and alert. Everything about him said preparation. Nothing about him said emotion. My lawyer slid the proposed custody agreement across the table. He barely glanced at it. "This won't work," he said. "Why?" I asked. He finally looked at me then, not with anger, not with sadness, with calculation. "Because it doesn't account for risk," he said. "Risk? Like we were discussing investments." His attorney spoke next, her tone smooth and measured. "My client is willing to offer generous financial support in exchange for clearly defined custodial parameters." I felt my stomach drop. "Exchange?" I repeated. She smiled politely. "Stability," she corrected. "Predictability." They handed over their version of the agreement. It was elaborate. Custody days tied to compliance clauses. Travel permissions contingent on financial reporting. Decision-making authority linked to funding thresholds. Every line came with conditions. Every condition had a price. "This isn't about the child's best interest," my attorney said sharply. "This is about control." My ex-husband didn't deny it. "Control prevents chaos," he said, "and chaos is expensive." I pushed the papers away. "I'm not signing this." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "Then we proceed," he said calmly. Proceed where? I would find out soon enough. Within days, motions were filed. Fast, precise, overwhelming. Requests for financial audits, psychological evaluations, emergency custody considerations based on environmental stability. It felt like drowning in paperwork. Every time I thought we'd respond, 3 more documents appeared. My attorney worked late. So did his. But he always seemed one step ahead. That's when my lawyer said something that stuck with me. "He's not trying to win custody," she said. "He's trying to exhaust you." And it was working. Between caring for a newborn and preparing legal responses, I barely slept. My savings began to thin. The pressure was constant. One afternoon, he called me directly. "I don't want this to be hard," he said. "You're the one making it hard," I replied. He chuckled softly. "No," he said. "I'm offering you an exit." He sent an updated proposal that night. More money, less time with my child. a clause labeled voluntary adjustment of custodial interest. My hand shook as I read it. This wasn't negotiation anymore. It was an offer. I refused. The next day, his tone changed. Not outwardly, legally, he invoked the prenup. For the first time, formally, his filing referenced Clause 14. 3 the same section my attorney had flagged days earlier. Assets of anticipated value. Dependent contractual interests. The words looked different on official court documents. Heavier, more dangerous. That was when my attorney requested full discovery. And that was when everything started to unravel. Because buried in the disclosures were references to communications that were never meant for me. Communications labeled third-party valuation. When I asked my attorney what that meant, she didn't answer right away. She just closed the file slowly. "Where did you think the money was coming from?" she asked. My blood ran cold. That night, I searched his name online, business forums, private investment circles, legal filings, and then I saw it, a listing, not public, not obvious, but real. A private discussion thread referencing custodial leverage, high net worth, clean legal framework. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was a marketplace. I realized then that the divorce wasn't the battlefield. It was the cover. The real fight was happening somewhere darker, quieter, and much more dangerous. And the closer I looked, the clearer it became. He wasn't asking the court for permission. He was testing its limits. By the time my attorney confirmed what we were dealing with, I was already living with a knot in my stomach that never loosened. Every email notification made my pulse spike. Every unknown number felt dangerous. Because now I knew the prenup wasn't just aggressive. It was designed. We sat in her office late one evening, the city lights blinking through the windows, as she laid out printed pages across the table. "These clauses," she said, tapping the paper, "don't operate alone." She slid another document beside it. "And neither do these." They were amendments, quietly filed, legally valid, signed years earlier. My signature was there. I didn't remember signing them. "That's not possible," I said. "I would have remembered." She shook her head. "They were bundled with routine financial updates," she said. "Same font, same format, same pressure to sign quickly." I felt sick. He hadn't rushed me. He had trained me. One amendment redefined dependent contractual interests. Not explicitly, just enough. It tied them to projected financial impact, reputational value, and long-term leverage. Leverage. That word again. Legally. My attorney said carefully, "He's arguing that custody itself can influence financial outcomes. That makes it quantifiable." I stared at her. "You're saying he turned parenting into a metric?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next discovery drop confirmed it. Spreadsheets, tables, columns labeled with numbers that made no sense at first. Then I recognized the headings. Age, public exposure, projected cost, control duration. This wasn't custody planning. This was valuation. He created a model. My attorney whispered. "A what?" I asked. "A financial model," she said, "to predict the return on control." I couldn't breathe. One entry stood out, highlighted, flagged. Optimal transfer window. "What does that mean?" I asked. She swallowed. "It means timing," she said, "when the leverage is highest." That night, I didn't sleep at all. I watched my child breathe, counting seconds between inhales, trying to understand how someone could reduce a human life to a graph. 2 days later, my ex-husband requested mediation, not out of desperation, out of confidence. He arrived early, relaxed, "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said. "We're just aligning incentives." I stared at him. "You're talking about our child," I said. He tilted his head slightly. "Emotion doesn't change outcomes," he replied. "Structure does." He slid a single page across the table. An offer, a large sum of money, immediate, in exchange for revised custodial terms, permanent ones. My attorney stood up. "This meeting is over," she said. He didn't flinch. "You'll reconsider," he said calmly. "Everyone does." That afternoon, my attorney did something unexpected. She smiled. "Good," she said. "What?" I asked. "He's finally shown his hand," she said. "And he made a mistake." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. Hope. Because the clause he thought protected him required transparency, any third-party involvement, any valuation, any attempted transfer of interest had to be disclosed to the court, and he hadn't done that. Not yet. That was when we stopped reacting and started planning, because the same clause he built to control everything was about to expose him. Once you know what to look for, the truth stops hiding. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream. It leaves fingerprints. And my ex-husband left them everywhere. My attorney and I spent days combing through discovery files, financial disclosures, and third-party communications. We weren't looking for proof anymore. We were looking for patterns. Shell companies, private trusts, law firms that specialized in non-traditional asset structuring. Then we found it. A folder mislabeled so casually, it almost felt insulting. Consulting projections. Inside were emails, invoices, and calendar invites, all connected by one phrase: prenuptial asset reallocation review. That wasn't legal language. That was code. The emails weren't addressed to me. They weren't meant for me. They were conversations between my ex-husband and a small circle of men who spoke about custody the way others talk about stock options. One message read, "Control duration significantly increases long-term leverage. Early acquisition is preferable." Another said, "Is exclusivity guaranteed post-transfer?" Transfer. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking. Then came the bids. They weren't labeled as bids. They were called commitments, each one tied to a condition, a timeline, a number. Some included notes like, "Willing to assume legal risk," "Prefer minimal maternal involvement," "Public exposure acceptable." I felt something break inside me. They weren't bidding on a child. They were bidding on control. "This isn't custody," my attorney said quietly. "It's an auction." She pointed to a spreadsheet. Rows of numbers, dates, percentages, and at the top, a phrase that made my stomach turn. Highest compliant offer. The bidders weren't criminals. That was the most terrifying part. They were wealthy, connected, careful, men who believed money made everything negotiable. Men who thought contracts could replace morality. One of them had written, "Ensure court exposure remains minimal. Optics are critical." Another added, "Prenup appears defensible. Proceed cautiously." They knew what they were doing, and they believed they would get away with it. Buried in the thread was something worse. A timeline, a countdown, target execution, upon judicial acknowledgement of clause validity. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. The courtroom wasn't the obstacle. It was the green light. My ex-husband wasn't waiting to see if the clause would hold. He was waiting for the court to legitimize it. Then he would act. My attorney closed the laptop slowly. "We need to be very careful," she said. "Careful how?" I asked. "Because if we confront him now," she said, "he'll destroy this." I nodded. I understood. We couldn't stop him yet. We had to let him continue. That was the hardest part, knowing what he was doing and pretending not to. Every message I received from his legal team felt heavier. Every delay in court felt dangerous, because somewhere, behind private emails and polite filings, the auction was still active. Then one morning, a new message appeared in the thread. Short, confident, final round scheduled, court hearing pending. I felt my blood run cold. The clock was ticking, and my ex-husband thought he was winning. What he didn't know was that we were about to turn his own system against him. There's a moment in every battle when you stop reacting, when fear gives way to focus. That moment came the night my attorney said 3 words I'll never forget. Let him proceed. I stared at her. You want him to keep going? I asked. She nodded. Because right now he thinks this is legal, she said. And the more comfortable he gets, the more careless he'll become. Careless wasn't a word I would have used to describe my ex-husband. But arrogance can imitate confidence, and confidence makes people talk. We stopped pushing back publicly. No emergency motions, no dramatic filings. Instead, we complied. We asked neutral questions. We agreed to procedural delays. We let his attorneys feel in control. Behind the scenes, everything changed. My attorney filed a narrow request with the court, not about custody, about disclosure. She cited the very clause my ex-husband was relying on, the one requiring transparency if third-party valuation influenced custodial terms. She didn't accuse. She invited clarification, and that invitation forced him to respond. He answered confidently, denied nothing directly, admitted nothing clearly, but his language shifted. Potential consultations, hypothetical assessments, no finalized agreements, finalized. That word mattered, because it meant everything else was real, just not finished. While his legal team crafted careful responses, we did something else. We documented every email, every delay, every reference to valuation. We logged timestamps, IP addresses, metadata. We didn't need emotion. We needed precision. At the same time, my ex-husband started behaving differently, more relaxed, more open. He sent messages he hadn't before. Casual comments like, "Once the hearing is over, things will stabilize," or, "This process rewards patience." He thought the end was near. Then he made his mistake. He forwarded an email, not to me, to his attorney. But the thread included an attachment he didn't realize was still active. A live document, shared, editable, and traceable. My attorney called me immediately. "Don't panic," she said, "but I need you to see this." When she opened the file, I felt my chest tighten. It was the auction ledger, updated, current, with a bold line at the bottom. Leading offer confirmed. Pending judicial outcome. Beside it was a name, not a code, a real name, and a dollar amount that made my head spin. "This is it," my attorney said. "This is what we've been waiting for." Because that name was already known to the court, a repeat litigant, a man with documented legal boundaries, someone no judge would want anywhere near a custody case. Suddenly, everything aligned. The prenup clause, the valuations, the third-party interest. It wasn't just immoral, it was reckless. We prepared quietly. No leaks, no threats. We assembled a timeline so clean, it told the story on its own. Every step he thought was hidden, now connected. The hearing date was set, the same one mentioned in the auction thread. I realized then how confident he was. He had synchronized everything. The court, the transaction, the transfer. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Not from fear, from anticipation. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting to see what he would do. I already knew. And tomorrow. The court would hear it too. The courthouse was already crowded when I arrived. Not with reporters. Not with cameras. With curiosity. Divorce hearings don't usually draw attention. But something about this one had spread quietly. Attorneys whispering to each other in hallways. Clerks exchanging looks that lingered a little too long. My ex-husband arrived 10 minutes later. Calm. Confident. He nodded at people like he belonged there. Like this was just another transaction being finalized. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavier than usual. The judge took his seat without ceremony. No small talk. No patience for theatrics. "Let's proceed," he said. My ex-husband's attorney stood first. She spoke smoothly, outlining the validity of the prenup, the foresight of its clauses, the importance of honoring agreements between competent adults. She emphasized predictability, stability, intent. At no point did she mention a child by name. When it was our turn, my attorney didn't rush. She stood slowly, holding a single folder. "Your Honor," she said, "this case is not about the enforceability of a prenuptial agreement." The judge raised an eyebrow. "It's about how that agreement was used." She paused. "And who was invited to participate?" She began with the clause, the one labeled "Assets of Anticipated Value." She read it aloud, word by word, letting the courtroom feel how vague it was, how carefully it avoided specifics. Then she introduced the amendments. Signed, dated, valid. My ex-husband nodded, as if this confirmed his position. He smiled. Then my attorney changed direction. "Your Honor," she said, "can a court enforce a clause without full disclosure of how it has been operationalized?" The judge leaned forward. "Explain," he said. She did, carefully, methodically. She laid out the concept of third-party valuation, of projected custodial leverage, of financial modeling tied directly to control over a minor. The room grew still. My ex-husband shifted in his seat, just once. My attorney submitted the emails. Not all of them, just enough. Subject lines, dates, names. She didn't read them yet. She let the judge look. The silence stretched. The judge looked up. "Counsel," he said to my ex-husband's attorney, "were these communications disclosed?" Her face tightened. "They appear to be preliminary," she said. "Hypothetical." The judge nodded slowly. "And were these hypothetical valuations shared with the court?" "No, Your Honor." "Why not?" Another pause. That's when my attorney spoke again. "Because disclosure would have revealed intent." She turned slightly. "And intent matters." My ex-husband finally stood. "I never sold anything," he said firmly. "There was no agreement." My attorney didn't argue. She smiled. "That's correct," she said. "Not yet." The courtroom murmured. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "If there was nothing to hide," she said, "why was the final round scheduled to occur after this hearing?" The judge's eyes sharpened. "Final round of what?" he asked. My attorney opened the folder, and for the first time, she played the audio. The courtroom speaker crackled to life. For a split second, there was only static. Then his voice filled the room. Calm, measured, familiar. The same voice that once whispered, "Promises to me in the dark." Now it said, "Once the judge validates the clause, we move forward. Custodial control transfers, as discussed. No emotion, no hesitation, just certainty." The room froze. No coughing, no shifting chairs. Even the judge didn't move. The audio continued. "At that point, compliance is guaranteed. She won't have leverage." My stomach turned. My ex-husband's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we object." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down," he said. The recording played on. "The prenup is airtight. The court only needs to acknowledge it. After that, the transaction is clean. Transaction. The word echoed. Someone in the gallery gasped. My ex-husband's face drained of color. This was the first time he looked unsure. The voice continued. Make sure the final offer reflects exclusivity. I don't want future interference. The audio stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The judge leaned back slowly. Counsel, he said to my ex-husband, do you recognize this voice? My ex-husband opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. Yes, he said quietly. The judge turned to my attorney. When was this recorded? 6 months before the divorce filing, she said. The judge's eyes narrowed. So this was planned. Yes, Your Honor. My ex-husband stood again. This is being taken out of context, he said. There was no sale. The judge didn't look convinced. You used the word transaction, he said, multiple times. My ex-husband didn't respond. My attorney stepped forward. Your Honor, she said, this court is being asked to validate a clause that was never meant to protect assets. She paused. It was meant to monetize custody. The room held its breath. The judge closed the file in front of him. Hard. Court will recess, he said. I need time to consider this. The gavel struck, once, sharp, final. As people stood, whispers exploded across the room. I stayed seated. My hands were shaking, because for the first time, the man who thought he controlled everything had lost control of the room. As he walked past me, my ex-husband didn't look at me. He didn't need to. I already knew what he was thinking. This wasn't over, but it was no longer his decision. The recess felt longer than the entire marriage. Minutes stretched into something heavier, thicker. Like time itself was waiting to see what kind of world it was about to become. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, my attorney beside me, neither of us speaking. Across the room, my ex-husband stood with his legal team, no longer relaxed. His confidence had cracked. He checked his phone too often, whispered sharply, stopped pacing only to start again. For the first time, he looked like a man reacting, not executing. When the bailiff called us back in, the room filled instantly. The judge entered without looking at anyone. No smile, no delay. He sat. Be seated. The judge didn't begin with legal theory. He began with intent. This court is deeply troubled, he said, by what it has heard. He looked directly at my ex-husband, not by the existence of a prenuptial agreement. He continued, but by the way it was weaponized. The room was silent. The judge cited the clause, then the amendments, then the communications, each one layered on the last, forming something undeniable. You did not disclose third-party valuation, he said. You did not disclose intent to transfer control. And you sought judicial validation to legitimize a private transaction. My ex-husband's attorney started to speak. The judge cut her off. No, he said. You will listen. The judge leaned forward. A child is not a negotiable asset, he said slowly, no matter how sophisticated the language. Someone in the gallery began to cry. The ruling followed, clear, direct. The prenup clause related to dependent contractual interests was voided. All amendments tied to custodial leverage were invalidated. Full legal and physical custody was awarded to me, effective immediately. My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the table, tears blurring my vision, as the words settled in. But the judge wasn't finished. This matter will be referred, he continued, to the appropriate authorities for further review. The room buzzed. My ex-husband went still. The judge turned his gaze back to him. You attempted to use this court as a shield, he said. Instead, you have exposed yourself. The gavel came down. Once. Final. My ex-husband didn't look at me as he gathered his things. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply walked out, smaller than I had ever seen him. Not defeated, revealed. Outside the courtroom, people stared. Some whispered. Some shook their heads. I held my child tighter than ever, because for the first time since the pregnancy, I wasn't afraid. But victory doesn't erase trauma. It just gives you space to breathe. And once the noise faded, I was left with a quiet truth. Justice had spoken, but healing was still ahead. The world doesn't snap back into place after a courtroom victory. There's no music, no applause, just silence. The kind that lingers once the danger has passed and your body doesn't know how to relax yet. In the weeks that followed the ruling, my life became quieter. Not because the pain disappeared, but because the noise stopped. No more legal alerts, no more unexpected emails, no more wondering what he was planning behind closed doors. The house felt different, safer. I moved, not far, just far enough to breathe without checking over my shoulder. I packed only what mattered: clothes, photos, a few memories I wasn't ready to let go of. The rest stayed behind, including the life I thought I had. People asked if I felt victorious. I didn't. I felt awake, because winning didn't undo the months of fear. It didn't erase the way I'd learned to listen for footsteps, or how I'd started measuring safety in silence. Healing doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly, sometimes late at night. I thought about the prenup, about the signatures, about how easy it had been to confuse protection with trust. I didn't blame myself anymore. I understood something I hadn't before. Control doesn't always arrive as violence. Sometimes it arrives as certainty. My child grew, not aware of courtrooms or clauses or spreadsheets. Just laughter, just curiosity, just life unfolding the way it's supposed to. And every time I watched that small chest rise and fall in sleep, I remembered the words the judge had spoken. A child is not a negotiable asset. I never spoke to my ex-husband again. I didn't need closure from him. The court had given me something better: freedom. People still ask how I knew, how I realized in time. The truth is, I almost didn't. One deleted email, one missed clause, one moment of silence where I should have spoken. That's all it would have taken. If there's anything this story taught me, it's this: read what you're asked to sign. Question what you're told is standard. And never let someone convince you that love requires surrender. Because some things should never be quantified, never negotiated, never placed on a ledger. And no matter how convincing the language, no matter how powerful the person across the table, some things were never for sale.